Grace Mitchell ran her finger across the tablet screen, analyzing the quarterly reports of the company's largest client. The numbers didn't add up. The office on the 32nd floor of the St. Clair Business Center was bustling with the usual morning hustle and bustle. But for Grace, only the columns of data on the monitor existed. "There's a mistake in the calculations," she said to her assistant David, pointing to a suspicious line. "Check the transactions for the last 3 months. Someone either stole $200,000 or transferred it to the wrong account." David leaned over her shoulder, peering at the spreadsheets. Grace was known at Sterling Partners for her ability to find financial discrepancies, where others saw only boring numbers. In 15 years on the job, she had never been wrong about her suspicions. "How do you do it?" David asked, shaking his head. "I've been looking at this data all week and I didn't notice anything." "It's all about patterns," Grace replied, leaning back in her chair. "People think money is just numbers, but every transaction tells a story. You just have to know how to read it." At 38, Grace looked younger than her age. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back into a strict bun, and her gray eyes behind thin glasses radiated calm confidence. She wore conservative business suits, but even her strict clothing couldn't hide her natural elegance. The phone on the table vibrated. A message from her husband. "Are you picking up the kids today?" "I have a meeting with a client until late tonight." Grace sighed. Tom had been staying late at work more and more often lately. His architecture firm was going through a rough patch, and he was trying to attract new clients. She understood the pressure he was under. She had been through it herself early in her career. "Of course," she replied. "See you at home." By 6 o'clock, Grace was already at the school, waiting for her children near the main entrance. Emily and Jacob, 15 and 17, were her pride and joy. Emily had inherited her mother's analytical mind and planned to study economics. Jacob was more like his father, a creative type, dreaming of a career in design. "How was school?" Grace asked as they got into the car. "Mrs. Parker gave us a ton of math homework again," Emily complained. "But I understand it all, unlike half the class." "Modesty isn't your strong suit," Jacob laughed. "I'm just stating the facts," her sister replied. "Like Mom always says, numbers don't lie." Grace smiled as she looked at her children in the rearview mirror. Despite all the challenges of balancing a career and motherhood, she was proud of how her children had turned out. They were smart, independent, and had clear goals in life. At home, she made dinner and helped the children with their homework. Tom didn't get home until 10 o'clock, tired and irritable. "How was your meeting?" Grace asked, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Not great," he replied, sinking into an armchair. "The client wants to cut corners on everything, including the quality of the materials. Sometimes I feel like no one appreciates real architecture." At 40, Tom still looked attractive. Tall, athletic, with wavy dark hair slightly graying at the temples, he was a talented architect. But in recent years, his ambitions had increasingly come up against the realities of the market. "Things will work out," said Grace, sitting down next to him. "Remember how hard it was at the beginning of my career? Now the company can't do without me." Tom nodded, but Grace noticed that he looked distracted. She put it down to fatigue and stress. The next morning, a surprise awaited her at the office. Her secretary informed her that she had a meeting with a potential partner, Lisa Connor from Connor Financial Solutions, a private consulting firm. The name sounded familiar, but Grace couldn't immediately place it. When an elegant woman in an expensive suit appeared in the conference room, her memory instantly jogged her. Lisa? Lisa Connor from Northwestern University? "Grace Mitchell!" exclaimed the guest, smiling broadly. "I can't believe it! How long has it been?" They hugged like old friends. Lisa had hardly changed over the years, still the same beautiful blonde with bright blue eyes and a charming smile. In college, she was one of the most popular students, skillfully combining a serious attitude toward her studies with an active social life. "I heard you work at Sterling Partners," said Lisa, sitting down at the table. "I always knew you'd go far. Remember our corporate finance class? You were the only one who understood Professor Wilson. And you're the only one who managed to get excellent grades without losing your social life," Grace replied. "Tell me, how are things? The last time we saw each other was at graduation." Lisa told her about her career in Chicago, her successful marriage to a restaurant chain owner, her recent divorce, and her decision to start over in St. Clair. "I'm tired of the big city," she explained. "I want something more personal. St. Clair seems like the perfect place for my business. There are a lot of wealthy people here who need financial advice, but the competition isn't as fierce." They discussed opportunities for collaboration. Lisa specialized in private clients, while Sterling Partners worked mainly with corporations. Their services complemented each other perfectly. "I must introduce you to my family," Grace said at the end of the meeting. "Tom, my husband, is an architect, and our children are almost grown. Come over for dinner this weekend." "I'd love to," Lisa replied. "I'm dying to see how my old friend lives." On Saturday evening, Tom spent more time than usual getting ready for dinner. He changed his clothes several times, carefully styled his hair, and even used the expensive cologne Grace had given him last Christmas. "I want to make a good impression on your friend," he explained, when Grace raised an eyebrow in surprise. Lisa arrived with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of expensive wine. She was wearing an elegant black dress that accentuated her figure, but remained stylish rather than provocative. At dinner, she charmed the entire family. She talked to the children about their plans for the future, showing genuine interest in their hobbies. She discussed architecture with Tom, demonstrating her impressive knowledge in this area. "My ex-husband wanted to build a restaurant in a historic style," she said. "I learned a lot about classical architecture helping him with the project." Tom was clearly impressed. Grace noticed how he listened intently to every word Lisa said, and how often he laughed at her jokes. At one point, she caught him looking at Lisa a little longer than he should have. "Your wife is amazing," Lisa said to Tom as they moved into the living room. "She was the smartest person in our class in college. I've always envied her ability to see solutions where others see only problems." "Yes, Grace is unique," Tom agreed, but his gaze was still fixed on Lisa. The evening went wonderfully. Lisa told funny stories from their college days, and the children listened with interest, getting to know their mother in a new way. "Remember how you figured out the whole strategy for our final investment project?" Lisa laughed. "Professor Clark said your analysis was better than half of the professional consulting firms. And remember how you talked the dean into giving us an extra week on the project?" Grace replied. "Your persuasion skills have always been impressive." When Lisa was ready to leave, Tom insisted on walking her to her car. "She's wonderful," he said as he returned to the house. "Smart, beautiful, interesting. It's amazing she's still single." "Lisa has always been special," Grace agreed. She had no shortage of admirers in college, but she was too focused on her career for a serious relationship. In the weeks that followed, Lisa became a frequent guest at the Mitchells' house. She came to family dinners, joined them on movie outings, and even helped the children with their economics projects. Grace was delighted to renew an old friendship. After years devoted to her career and family, she had little time for personal relationships. Lisa brought freshness and energy to their measured life. Tom had also changed. He became more lively, joked more, and paid more attention to his appearance. Grace thought that meeting new people had done him good. "Lisa told an interesting story about the renovation of a mansion in Chicago," he said over dinner. "It turns out that the architect found a way to preserve the historic facade while completely modernizing the interior." Emily and Jacob also grew fond of Aunt Lisa, as they called her. She gave them thoughtful gifts, helped them with their studies, and always found time to listen to their problems. The only thing that surprised Grace a little was how much Lisa learned about their family. She asked a lot of questions about Tom's work, took an interest in his projects, and praised his talent. Sometimes Grace felt that her friend was paying too much attention to her husband, but she chalked it up to a natural desire to fit in with their family. At the end of the month, they began working together officially. Lisa referred private clients who needed corporate financial services to them, and Sterling Partners recommended her to wealthy clients for personal financial planning. "This could be the beginning of a wonderful partnership," Lisa said as she signed the cooperation agreement in Grace's office. "I think so too," Grace replied, watching her friend examine the interior of her office. "You know, sometimes I feel like fate brought us back together at the exact moment we both needed it." "Maybe you're right," Lisa smiled. "Although I must admit, I've always envied your life. A successful career, a wonderful family, a husband who still looks at you with loving eyes." Grace laughed. Tom looks at me more like a roommate these days. 15 years of marriage have taken their toll. Don't say that, Lisa objected. It's obvious that he loves you, and your children are so smart and well-behaved. You have everything you could ever want. 2 months had passed since Lisa had come into the Mitchells' lives, and Grace was increasingly appreciative of their renewed friendship. Their business partnership was thriving. 3 major clients had already come to them thanks to Lisa's recommendations, and Grace had referred 2 wealthy entrepreneurs in need of personal financial planning to her friend. "Your friend is worth her weight in gold," said managing partner Robert Sterling during the weekly meeting. "The clients she's brought us have already brought in $500,000. Where did you find her?" "We went to university together," Grace replied, looking through reports. Lisa always had a way with people. It was true. Lisa had a rare gift for winning over clients from the first meeting. She skillfully combined professionalism with personal charm, making people feel special and understood. That evening, Grace was working at home, analyzing new client portfolios when the phone rang. "Hi, it's Lisa. Am I disturbing you?" "Not at all. What's up?" "I've been thinking about our conversation about expanding our client base. I have an idea, but I'd like to discuss it with someone smart. How about we meet for lunch tomorrow?" Grace agreed, but suggested meeting at her house so they could talk quietly without being distracted by the noise of a restaurant. The next day, Lisa arrived around noon with a bag from an expensive deli and a bottle of white wine. "I thought we deserved a festive lunch after all our successes," she explained, arranging the exquisite appetizers on the kitchen table. "Is Tom home?" she asked, looking around. "No, he's at a meeting with potential investors for a new residential complex. He'll be busy until evening." Lisa nodded, but Grace thought she saw a flash of disappointment in her eyes. They discussed Lisa's idea of creating joint financial planning seminars for wealthy families in St. Clara. It was a good plan that could attract new clients for both companies. "You've always been a strategist," Grace said, taking notes. "I remember in college how you used to plan every step several moves ahead. And you were always the one who found the details I missed," Lisa replied. "We're the perfect team." The conversation gradually turned to personal topics. Lisa talked about her divorce in more detail than she had before. Mark was a good husband, but predictable. Every day was the same. Work, home, sleep. No surprises, no passion. I felt like I was in a golden cage. "Do you regret it now?" Grace asked. "Sometimes, especially when I see families like yours. Tom is so energetic and creative. You can tell he's a real man, not some office drone." Grace frowned. Tom is going through a rough patch in his business. Competition is fierce and many projects are falling through. But he has talent and the support of his family. That's enough for success. Lisa poured herself some more wine. "By the way, did he say anything about that country house project we discussed last week?" Grace was surprised. "What project?" "Oh, he probably hasn't told you yet. I mentioned that I was thinking about buying some land outside the city, and he offered to design a house for me. For free, as a favor to an old friend." That was strange. Tom had never mentioned such a conversation. Moreover, he had always been critical of free work, saying that it devalued the profession. "He probably forgot to tell you," Grace said, trying not to show her surprise. "He's very busy right now." After Lisa left, Grace couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. Something about her friend's behavior seemed strange to her. Too many questions about Tom, too much detailed interest in his projects. That evening, when Tom came home, she decided to clear things up. "How's the project for Lisa going?" she asked casually as she set the table for dinner. Tom froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. "What project?" "The country house. Lisa said you were discussing it." "Oh, that." Tom looked away. "We were just talking. Nothing concrete yet." "But you offered to do it for free?" "She's an old friend. She helps us with the business. Isn't it only fair to return the favor?" The logic was sound, but Tom's tone struck Grace as defensive. She decided not to press the issue. Perhaps she was making a mountain out of a molehill. Over the next few weeks, Lisa began to visit their home more frequently. Sometimes she came over on business, but always stayed for dinner. Other days, she dropped in just to chat when she knew Grace was still at work and Tom was home. The children loved Aunt Lisa. She helped Emily with her exams and discussed design projects with Jacob. What's more, She seemed genuinely interested in their lives and plans. Aunt Lisa said she has a friend at the New York Institute of Design, Jacob said at dinner. She can set up a meeting for me when I apply. That's wonderful, Grace replied, but she noticed how Tom's eyes lit up at the mention of Lisa. She also began to notice small changes in her husband's behavior. Tom started taking better care of himself. He went to the gym regularly, updated his wardrobe, and even got a new haircut. When Grace asked him about the reasons for these changes, he replied that he wanted to look more presentable to potential clients. One evening, when Lisa was visiting, Grace went to the kitchen for coffee and overheard a conversation in the living room. "You don't understand how important this is to me," Tom said in a low voice. "I understand more than you think," Lisa replied. "Talented people often feel underappreciated." Exactly. Grace is a wonderful wife, but she doesn't understand creative ambitions. For her, it's all about numbers and practicality. Grace froze at the door, not daring to enter. Her heart ached at her husband's words. "Everyone deserves understanding," Lisa said softly, "especially special people like you." When Grace returned with coffee, both looked normal, but the atmosphere in the room seemed charged with tension. In the days that followed, she began to observe Tom and Lisa's interactions more closely. What had previously seemed like normal friendliness now looked different. There were lingering glances, accidental touches, and shared jokes that only the two of them understood. During one of the family dinners, Lisa talked about her new client, the owner of a chain of fitness clubs. "He's a real egoist," she laughed. "He thinks he's an unbeatable businessman, but he has no idea about tax planning. I had to explain the basics to him." "Many successful people are overly confident," Grace agreed. "In my practice, clients like that often cause the most problems." "Exactly," Tom agreed. "Architecture is also full of people who think they know better than professionals how a building should look." "But you're not like that," said Lisa, looking at Tom. "You know how to listen and understand people's needs. That's a rare quality." Grace noticed how her husband straightened his shoulders at the compliment and smiled contentedly. After dinner, when the children had gone to do their homework and Lisa was helping clear the table, Grace watched them from the hallway. They moved around the kitchen with remarkable synchrony, as if they had been living together for years. Lisa passed Tom the plates. He rinsed them and put them in the dishwasher. A quiet, intimate conversation was taking place between them that Grace couldn't make out. At one point, Lisa reached for a towel and her hand touched Tom's. The contact lasted only a second, but Grace saw them both freeze, looking into each other's eyes. "Need some help?" Grace asked loudly as she entered the kitchen. They both jumped away from each other. "We're almost done," Lisa replied quickly. "Tom is such a help, not like my ex-husband." "Yes, Tom always helps around the house," Grace said, studying both of their faces closely. "Right, honey?" "Of course," Tom replied, avoiding her gaze. That evening, after Lisa left, Grace tried to talk to her husband. "You seem to be enjoying your time with Lisa," she began cautiously. "She's an interesting person," Tom replied, without looking up from the TV. "And understanding. It's nice to talk to someone who appreciates art." "I appreciate your art too." "In your own way, yes, but Lisa really understands the creative process." Grace felt a pang of jealousy. "Tom, we've been married for 15 years. I thought you knew I supported your career." "You support me financially, yes, but when I talk about new ideas, about creative pursuits, you immediately ask how much it will cost and whether it will be profitable. Because someone has to think about the practical side of things. We have children, a mortgage, expenses." "Exactly." Tom turned to her. "For you, it all comes down to money." Lisa understands that there are things more important than profit. The conversation came to a standstill. Grace understood her husband's logic, but something about the situation bothered her. Lisa had only come into their lives a few months ago, and already she knew Tom better than his own wife. The following week, something happened that finally made Grace suspicious. She came home earlier than usual and found Tom and Lisa in the living room, poring over some drawings. "What's that?" she asked, coming closer. "A house plan for Lisa," Tom replied without looking up. "We're discussing the layout." Grace looked at the drawings. It was a beautiful two-story house with large windows and a modern design. Clearly not a quick sketch, but serious work that had taken a lot of time. "When did you do this?" she asked. "In the evenings after work. I haven't seen you working at home." "I do it at the office when I stay late." So that's what he'd been doing during his late nights at work, not looking for new clients, but working on a free project for Lisa. "That's amazing," Lisa said, smiling at Tom. "You took every one of my wishes into account. It's like you read my mind." "We just have a good understanding," he replied, and there was a warmth in his voice that Grace hadn't heard in a long time. That evening, after Lisa left, Grace couldn't hold back any longer. "Tom, how much time did you spend on this project?" "I don't know. I didn't count." "What does it matter?" "It matters because that time could have been spent on paying clients, or on your family. Lisa isn't just a client. She's a friend of the family. My friend, not yours." "She's mine now too," Tom replied sharply. "Or are you against me having friends?" Grace realized that the conversation was going in the wrong direction again. She tried to be reasonable, but every word she said only angered her husband. That night, they went to bed without speaking to each other. Grace lay awake for a long time, analyzing what had happened. Her analytical mind, accustomed to finding patterns in numbers, was now looking for patterns in the behavior of those close to her. The next few weeks passed in a tense atmosphere. Grace tried to behave as usual, but every encounter with Lisa, every interaction between her friend and Tom, added new details to the picture forming in her mind. She began to apply the same analytical methods she used at work to her personal life. She tracked Tom's return home, recorded the frequency of his calls and messages, and analyzed changes in his behavior. Every day brought new data, and it all pointed in one direction. Tom started staying late at work 3 or 4 times a week instead of just once. He began watching his phone, keeping it face down and immediately putting it away when messages came in. Twice she saw him smile as he read something on the screen, but when she asked him about it, he said it was work. Most importantly, he had changed outwardly. He didn't just start dressing better, he seemed to glow from within. He had an energy that he hadn't had in years. He was joking again, humming in the shower and paying more attention to the children, but not to her. "Mom, are you okay?" Emily asked one morning at breakfast. "You seem kind of preoccupied lately." "Everything's fine, honey," Grace replied, pouring coffee. "Just a lot of work." "Aunt Lisa said that stress at work can affect family relationships," Jacob added. "Maybe you should take some time off?" Grace was surprised. "When did she say that?" "Yesterday when she came to see Dad. They were discussing some plans for the house, and then the conversation turned to family psychology." "Lisa came yesterday?" Grace tried to keep her voice calm. "Yes, around 4 o'clock. Dad was showing her some new blueprints." Grace had worked until 7, and Tom said he'd been at the office all day. That meant Lisa had come to their house while she was out. That evening, she decided to get to the bottom of things. "The kids said Lisa came by yesterday," she said to Tom when they were alone. "Yes, she stopped by for a couple of minutes," he replied, without looking up from the newspaper. "What for?" "She wanted to look at some corrections to the project." "Tom, this can't go on." He finally looked up. "What exactly?" "You're spending too much time on this project, and you're letting Lisa into the house when I'm not here." "What's wrong with that? Lisa's your friend." "She's my friend, but she's not your client. You have paying clients who need your attention." Tom put down the newspaper and turned to face her. "Grace, I understand that you're used to being in control at work, but at home, it's my responsibility. I decide how to allocate my time." "It's not about control. It's about priorities. We're a family, and our interests should come before those of strangers." "Lisa isn't a stranger," Tom's voice rose. "She helps us with the business and brings in clients. Isn't it normal to thank her?" "Gratitude and what's happening now are two different things." "What's happening now?" Tom asked, a dangerous note creeping into his voice. Grace realized she had reached a critical point. She could accuse her husband directly of having an inappropriate relationship with his friend, but she had no proof. Only suspicions based on small details and intuition. "You've changed," she said more quietly. "And those changes started when Lisa came into your life. I've changed for the better, For the first time in years, I feel like someone appreciates my work and understands my ideas. And I don't? In your own way, yes. But you see me primarily as a breadwinner, a man who has to bring money into the family. Lisa sees me as an artist. These words hurt Grace deeply. Was she really such a pragmatic wife that her husband felt unappreciated? Tom, I've always supported your career. You supported it as long as it was profitable. But when the going got tough, you immediately started reminding me of my responsibilities to the family. Grace realized that a chasm had formed between them, one she hadn't even suspected existed. But she also realized that Lisa was skillfully exploiting this crack in their relationship. In the days that followed, she became more observant. She noticed that Lisa called Tom about work much more often than she did, that she always found reasons to visit them when Grace was at work, that the children began to mention Aunt Lisa more often in conversation. And Aunt Lisa says became a familiar phrase in their home. Grace decided to do a little investigating. She knew Tom's bank card passwords. They had always been open with each other when it came to financial matters. Checking the statements, she discovered expenses she hadn't expected to see. A bill from an expensive restaurant for an amount clearly intended for two. Flowers had been purchased on a day when no one was home. There was a parking fee in the neighborhood where Lisa lived, at a time when he was supposedly at the office. Each discovery was like a punch in the gut, but Grace kept gathering information. Her analytical mind demanded a complete picture before making any decisions. The decisive moment came on Friday evening. Tom said he would be working late on an important project. Grace decided to check this claim. She left the children at home with pizza and a movie, saying she needed to pick up some documents from the office. Instead, she drove to the building where Tom's architecture firm was located. The office was dark. Tom's car was nowhere to be seen. Grace got into her car and tried to calm down. Maybe he was at a meeting with a client. Maybe he really did have work to do elsewhere. But a voice inside her suggested a different explanation. Almost automatically, she drove to the neighborhood where Lisa lived. It was a new development with modern condominiums, where Lisa rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor. Tom's familiar car was in the parking lot. Grace sat in her car for 10 minutes, not knowing what to do. Part of her wanted to go upstairs and make a scene. Another part advised her to leave and pretend she hadn't seen anything. A third suggested waiting for Tom to come out and asking him for an explanation. She chose the third option. An hour passed. Then another half hour. Grace was starting to freeze, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. She needed certainty, definitive confirmation that her worst suspicions were true. Finally, the front door opened. Lisa came out first, wearing a light robe that she had obviously thrown on over her underwear. Tom appeared next, adjusting his shirt. They embraced at the door. It wasn't a friendly goodbye hug, but a long, passionate kiss. Then Tom whispered something in her ear, making Lisa laugh and playfully push him away. Grace felt her heart break. It was one thing to suspect, but quite another to see it with her own eyes. Tom got into his car and drove off in the opposite direction, probably to create an alibi for being late for work. Lisa stood there for a few more seconds, smiling, then went back into the house. Grace drove home in a daze. The children were already asleep, and the house was quiet and dark. She sat down in the kitchen and tried to make sense of what she had seen. 15 years of marriage, 2 children, shared plans, dreams, memories, and all of it destroyed because of her husband's selfish whim and the betrayal of her best friend. Tom returned around 11, looking slightly disheveled and satisfied. "How's it going?" he asked, kissing Grace on the cheek. She smelled a foreign perfume. "Fine," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "How was work?" "Tough, but productive. I think the project is starting to take shape." Every word he said was a lie. But Grace didn't make a scene. Not then, not like that. She needed time to think, analyze the situation, and make a balanced decision. She hardly slept that night. She lay next to the man who had betrayed her with her best friend and tried to decide what to do next. By morning, she had made several decisions. First, she would not make a scene. That would only give Tom and Lisa the opportunity to paint her as a hysterical wife who suspected her husband of sins he did not commit. Second, she would gather all the evidence she could find of their affair. financial documents, phone records, testimonials, anything she might need in a divorce. Third, she would find out the whole truth about the nature of their relationship. Was it a casual fling or a serious relationship? How long had it been going on? Are they planning something more long-term? And fourth, she will protect her children from the consequences of this situation. They should not suffer because of the selfishness of adults. She could hardly concentrate at work. The numbers blurred before her eyes, and her thoughts kept returning to what she had seen the day before. "Grace, are you okay?" David asked. "You look tired." "I just didn't sleep well," she replied. "Can you take over the Johnson portfolio analysis? I need to focus on Miller's report." She decided to use her work skills to solve her personal problems. If Tom and Lisa thought they could fool her, they had underestimated her investigative abilities. During her lunch break, she called a private investigator recommended by one of her clients during a divorce case. She made an appointment for the next day. That evening at home, she acted as usual. She made dinner, helped the kids with their homework, and discussed weekend plans with Tom. No one suspected that she was burning with pain and anger inside. "By the way," Tom said during dinner, "Lisa invited us all to a picnic this weekend. She has friends with a house on the lake." Grace almost choked on her water. What incredible nerve, inviting her lover's family on a vacation together. "Sounds tempting," she said calmly. "Will you have time? I remember you mentioning an important project." "The project can wait. Everyone needs a break sometimes." "Great!" Emily exclaimed. "It's been ages since we've been to the lake." Looking at the happy faces of the children, Grace felt a new wave of anger wash over her. Not only had Tom and Lisa cheated on her, but they were dragging their children into their game. "Fine," she said. "Let's go on a picnic." But deep down, she knew this wouldn't be a normal family outing. It would be an opportunity to observe them together, to learn more about their relationship. Her analytical mind was already making plans. She would study their behavior, note every detail, every glance, every word. And then she would decide what to do with the information she gathered. Tom and Lisa were playing a dangerous game, thinking she was unaware, but they underestimated their victim. Grace Mitchell was not a naive housewife who could be easily deceived. She was an intelligent, calculating woman with an analytical mind. And now, all her abilities were focused on one goal: finding out the truth and deciding what to do about it. The next day, she met with private investigator Mark Benson, a middle-aged man with an unremarkable appearance and a sharp gaze. "Standard case of marital infidelity?" he asked, after listening to a brief summary of the situation. "Not exactly standard," Grace replied. "The mistress is my best friend. They both enjoy playing cat and mouse with me." "I see. How much evidence do you need?" "All I can get. Photographs, recordings of conversations, financial documents. I want to know everything. How long this has been going on, how serious their relationship is, if they have any plans for the future." Benson nodded. "I can arrange surveillance, plant bugs in the husband's car, check his phone records. All legal, of course. Do whatever you think is necessary. Money is no object." As she left the detective's office, Grace felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, she was doing something instead of just suffering in silence. 3 weeks had passed since Grace hired Detective Benson. His reports were detailed and painful. Photos of Tom and Lisa entering and leaving hotels, transcripts of their phone conversations, full of intimate details and plans for the future. Financial documents showing that Tom had been spending family money on gifts for his mistress. But what shocked Grace most was the content of one of the recordings. "I'm tired of pretending," Lisa said. "When are you finally going to tell her the truth?" "Soon," Tom replied. "I need to find the right moment. The children have to finish the school year." "And then what? Will you divorce her and marry me?" "Of course. You know I love you. Sometimes I think you just like playing at secret meetings." "No, Lisa. I'm serious about our relationship. Grace and I have been living together as roommates for a long time. We have nothing left except the children and habit." Every word was like a knife in her heart. Grace realized that her marriage wasn't just going through a crisis. It was dead. And Tom and Lisa were planning to make their relationship official, destroying her family. That same evening, an incident occurred that sealed the fate of the relationship. At dinner, Tom announced that he would be going on a business trip to Chicago next week to attend an architecture exhibition. How many days? Grace asked. 4 days, Thursday through Sunday. Aunt Lisa is also going to Chicago this week, Emily innocently remarked. She said she has a business meeting there. Tom blushed but quickly regained his composure. Yes, she mentioned it. Maybe we can meet for coffee while we're in town. Grace nodded, but inside she was boiling. They weren't even trying to hide their plans from the children. What's more, they were using the children as an alibi for their meetings. That night, Grace lay awake for a long time, analyzing the situation. She had two options: start divorce proceedings or take another path. Divorce meant public humiliation, lengthy court proceedings, division of property, and trauma for the children. Tom and Lisa would get what they wanted, the opportunity to be together without taking any responsibility for destroying a family. But there was another option. Over the next few days, Grace studied Lisa's schedule with the same thoroughness with which she analyzed financial reports. Lisa worked in a small office building in the business district of the city. Her office was on the 3rd floor. The staff usually left at 7 in the evening, and the security guard made rounds every 2 hours after 9. On Tuesdays, Lisa always stayed late, working on reports for clients. On those days, she ordered food to the office and remained alone in the building until 10 or 11 in the evening. It was the perfect time and place. Grace drew up a plan with the same methodical precision with which she prepared business presentations. Every detail was calculated, every risk considered. On Tuesday evening, she told her family that she was going to visit a college friend who was in town for the day. The children were busy with their homework, and Tom was working on a new project. "Don't wait up for me," she told her husband. "We might talk late into the night." "Have a good time," Tom replied, without even looking up from his drawings. Grace parked 2 blocks away from Lisa's office building and walked the rest of the way. She was wearing dark clothes, and her hair was hidden under a hood. She avoided surveillance cameras, following a route she had studied in advance. In her bag were gloves, a flashlight, and a heavy glass statuette, an award for her work that she had received a year ago. The irony of the situation did not escape her. The security guard had just finished his rounds. She had almost 2 hours before the next one. The service entrance to the building was locked with an electronic lock, but Grace knew the code. Lisa used the same combination for all her locks. Her birthday. Another small detail that her friend had carelessly mentioned in conversation. The 3rd floor was plunged into darkness, except for Lisa's office. Light was shining through the door, and the sound of typing could be heard from inside. Grace waited a few minutes, calming her breathing and gathering her thoughts. Then she knocked quietly on the door. "Yes?" Lisa replied. "It's me, Grace. Can I come in?" The door opened, and a surprised Lisa appeared in casual clothes, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "Grace? What are you doing here? How did you get into the building?" "The security guard downstairs knows me," Grace lied, entering the office. "I told him we were business partners." "But why did you come so late?" Grace closed the door behind her and turned to Lisa. In the light of the desk lamp, her friend's face looked tired but still beautiful. It was the same face that had smiled at Tom as he embraced her in the doorway. "We need to talk," Grace said calmly. "About what?" Lisa returned to the desk but did not sit down. Her voice was guarded. "About Tom." They stared at each other for a few seconds. Then Lisa's face changed. The mask of friendliness disappeared, replaced by an expression of cold calculation. "What exactly do you know?" she asked. "Everything. The hotel meetings, the plans for a trip to Chicago together, the talk of divorce." Lisa slowly sank into a chair. "How long?" 3 weeks. "And what do you plan to do?" Grace approached the table. "I came to give you a chance to stop this." Lisa laughed, shortly, without humor. "Seriously? You think you can tell me to leave Tom? I think you can do the right thing and walk out of our lives." "Why should I do that? Tom is unhappy in his marriage, you know that." "Tom is my husband, the father of my children." "So what? Does that give you the right to keep him with you against his will?" Lisa stood up, her voice growing more confident. "Grace, your marriage ended a long time ago. Tom is only staying with you out of a sense of duty. And you've decided to help him get rid of that duty? I gave him what he didn't get at home for years: understanding, admiration, passion. Each word hit like a slap. You were my best friend. And I'm still your friend. That's why I'm telling you honestly, let him go. Find someone who will truly love you. How noble of you. Lisa moved closer, her voice softening, almost sympathetic. Grace, I didn't plan to fall in love with Tom, it just happened. We're right for each other. You're right for each other, Grace repeated. Two selfish people who only think about their own desires. Don't say that. Tom is a good man. A good man doesn't cheat on his wife with her best friend. A good man doesn't stay in a loveless marriage just for the sake of the children and public opinion. Grace felt something inside her break completely. So you're not going to end things with him? No, Lisa replied firmly. We love each other. After the trip to Chicago, Tom will tell the children the truth. And then what? You'll get married and live happily ever after? Maybe, and you'll find someone more suitable. Grace slowly took the figurine out of her bag. The heavy glass figure fit comfortably in her hand. You know what hurts the most? She said quietly. I really thought you were my friend. I told you about my marital problems, shared my doubts, and you used that information against me. Lisa noticed the figurine and instinctively took a step back. Grace, what are you doing? What I should have done a long time ago. Wait, we can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. Grace raised the figurine. Fear appeared in Lisa's eyes. Grace, don't do anything stupid. Think about the children, about the future. I am thinking about the future. A future without you. Lisa tried to get around the table, but Grace was faster. The blow landed squarely on her temple. Lisa fell, hitting her head on the edge of the table. Grace stood over the body for a few seconds, breathing heavily. Then she bent down and checked for a pulse. There was none. She then proceeded according to her premeditated plan. She wiped the statuette and the surfaces she had touched. She ransacked the office to make it look like a robbery. She took the money and expensive jewelry from Lisa's bag, which she would later throw into the river. Leaving the building, she avoided cameras and witnesses. She drove to the river, got rid of the evidence, and returned home by 11:30. How's your friend? Tom asked when she entered the bedroom. Fine. We had a nice chat. The next morning, the body was discovered by a cleaning lady. By noon, news of the murder in the business center had spread throughout the city. Grace found out about it at work from her secretary. Can you imagine a woman was killed right in her office? They say it was a robbery. The poor thing was working late and got caught by the criminals. That's terrible, Grace replied. Who was she? Some kind of financial advisor. Lisa Connor, I think. Grace feigned shock. Lisa Connor, but she's my friend. We work together. The rest of the day passed in a haze of sympathetic colleagues, phone calls, and the need to feign grief. The hardest part was talking to the children. Mommy, is it true that Aunt Lisa was killed? Emily asked when Grace got home. Yes, sweetie. It's a very scary story. Tom was in shock. He sat in the living room, pale and distraught, and Grace almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I can't believe it, he repeated. She called yesterday. We talked about business. Did the police say anything about suspects? Grace asked. Not yet. It looks like a random robbery. That evening, detectives came to their home. A middle-aged man in a wrinkled suit and a woman with attentive eyes. Detective Reynolds, Detective Harris, they introduced themselves. We're investigating the murder of Lisa Connor. We understand you were close to the victim. Lisa was an old friend of mine, Grace replied. We had recently reconnected and started working together. Detective Harris took notes. When was the last time you saw her? Last Friday. We had lunch and discussed a project we were working on. And where were you last night? At home with my family until 8, then I went to see a friend from college. She was in town for the day. Grace gave the name and phone number of a fictitious friend, knowing that by the time the detectives tried to check her alibi, she would have a more detailed version ready. And you, Mr. Mitchell? At home, working on a project. Detective Harris looked at him intently. Did you know the victim too? Yes, through my wife. Lisa sometimes came to visit us. Did she mention any problems? Threats? Grace shook her head. No, nothing like that. She was a cautious person, but not paranoid. After the detectives left, Tom sat silently for a long time. Then he got up and went into his office, closing the door behind him. Grace knew he was calling someone, probably canceling his trip to Chicago. His mistress would no longer be meeting him there. A week had passed since the murder, and Grace was surprised to find that the relief of having solved the problem was mixed with an unexpected pain of loss. She hadn't expected to miss Lisa, their conversations, their laughter, their shared memories from college. By killing the traitor, she had also lost her only close friend. At night, Grace woke up in a cold sweat, dreaming of Lisa's last moments, the look of surprise in her blue eyes when she realized what was happening. In those moments, Grace wondered if there had been another way out. Maybe she should have just divorced Tom and started a new life. But during the day, looking at her children and imagining their reaction to their parents' divorce, she convinced herself that she had done the right thing. The family had been saved, albeit at a terrible price. Tom no longer stayed late at work or received secret messages. He was depressed and silent, as if part of his soul had died with Lisa. He canceled his trip to Chicago and hardly left the house on the weekend. The children attributed his condition to the shock of the death of a family friend. Grace watched her husband with painful curiosity. He sincerely mourned his mistress, and this caused her new pain. She had killed the woman her husband truly loved. Detectives Reynolds and Harris continued their investigation methodically and thoroughly. They interviewed all the employees in the office building, studied surveillance camera footage within a 3-block radius, and analyzed Lisa's financial affairs for the past 6 months. So far, everything pointed to a random robbery with a tragic outcome. Grace closely followed the investigation, calling the police under the pretext of concern about the case. Detective Reynolds was always polite but taciturn. Several blurry images from surveillance cameras, no witnesses, stolen money and jewelry. It all looked like the work of a professional robber. But Detective Harris saw the case from a different angle. During her second visit to the Mitchells, she asked more personal questions about Lisa's relationship with her family. She paid particular attention to Tom's reactions, who was clearly more nervous than usual. Grace noticed how her husband avoided direct answers to questions about his relationship with the victim. He was a poor actor, unlike her. Years of experience in business negotiations had taught her to control her emotions and facial expressions. Detective Harris was an experienced investigator. She sensed that something was wrong with the Mitchell family, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. There were too many small inconsistencies in their statements. The husband was too nervous, and the wife's reactions were too controlled. The turning point came 2 weeks after the murder. The police searched Lisa's apartment again, this time more thoroughly. In a hidden compartment of the home safe, they found a folder with photographs and letters. The photos had been taken by a professional detective. Tom and Lisa entering a hotel, kissing in a car, holding hands in a restaurant. The photos were accompanied by detailed reports of the dates, times, and places of their meetings. The letters were written in Tom's handwriting, passionate messages full of promises to leave his family for his new love. Detective Harris studied the documents with growing understanding. Lisa wasn't just seeing a married man. She was collecting evidence of their affair. Why? For blackmail? Or just as insurance in case Tom changed his mind about getting a divorce? The most interesting report was the one dated the day of the murder. The last entry read, "The client is planning to meet with the subject tomorrow evening to discuss future plans." So Lisa hired a private investigator to follow Tom, and he was supposed to meet her the day after the murder, a meeting that never took place. Harris realized that this was not a random robbery, but a murder motivated by family conflict. All that remained was to find out who the killer was, the cheating husband or the betrayed wife. Checking the alibis revealed the first serious inconsistencies. The college friend Grace was supposedly meeting on the night of the murder did not exist. No hotel in the city had registered a Jessica Wilson or Jessica Brown. The phone number Grace had given turned out to be invalid. Detective Harris began to suspect that Mrs. Mitchell had lied about her whereabouts on the night of the crime. But why lie if she was innocent? An analysis of phone records showed that Tom had called Lisa several times on the day of the murder. The last call was at 6 p.m., an hour before the estimated time of death. Grace did not call her friend at all that day, which was strange for business partners who usually communicated daily. An examination of the Mitchell family's financial records revealed another interesting detail. 3 weeks before the murder, Grace withdrew a large sum of cash from her personal account. No official reason was given, but the amount matched the private investigator's fee for a month's work. Detective Harris began to piece together the puzzle. Grace had learned of her husband's affair, hired a detective to gather evidence, and then decided to solve the problem in a radical way. A classic case of murder out of jealousy, disguised as a robbery, but material evidence was needed. Harris obtained a search warrant for the Mitchells' home, hoping to find clues linking Grace to the crime scene. The search began early in the morning while the children were at school. The police methodically checked every room, every closet, every hidden corner. Grace watched the process with outward calm, but inside she was growing increasingly anxious. She was sure she had destroyed all evidence linking her to the murder. The clothes had been burned, the murder weapon thrown into the river, and her route carefully planned to avoid surveillance cameras. But there was always the possibility that she had overlooked some small detail. A critical mistake was discovered in the garage. In the far corner of the trash can, under a layer of ordinary household waste, the police found a plastic bag with gloves. There were dark spots on the latex, which preliminary tests identified as human blood. Grace stared at the bag in horror. She clearly remembered throwing the gloves into the river along with Lisa's jewelry. How did they end up in the household trash? Then she remembered. In her rush to get home, she had thrown her jacket into the washing machine without checking the pockets. The gloves could have been left there and then ended up in the trash along with other items from the pockets. One small mistake ruined her entire carefully thought-out plan. Detective Harris held the bag of evidence and looked at Grace with an expression of sad satisfaction. Another case solved, another family destroyed by human weakness. The arrest took place in front of the children, who had returned from school at the worst possible moment. Emily cried, not understanding what was happening. Jacob stood frozen, trying to comprehend that his mother was being accused of murder. Tom looked at his wife with an expression that was a mixture of shock, pain, and something like understanding. Perhaps he finally realized the true price of his affair. In the police car, Grace thought about how everything had gone wrong. The plan had been almost perfect, every detail calculated with mathematical precision. But the human factor, fatigue, stress, emotions, had led to a fatal mistake. She also thought about Lisa, about the woman who had been her friend, her betrayer, and her victim all at once, about how their friendship had ended in such a terrible way, about how Lisa's death had not brought the relief she had expected, but only added new pain. In the holding cell, Grace cried for the first time in many years, for her dead friend, for her broken family, for her own ruined life. She wanted to protect what was dear to her, but in the end, she destroyed everything. Blood tests on the gloves confirmed Lisa's DNA. The fingerprints inside the gloves belonged to Grace. The examination established that the blood had gotten onto the latex as a result of direct contact with the victim's wound. The case was closed a month after the murder. Grace Mitchell was charged with first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. The motive was jealousy and a desire to keep her family together at any cost. During the trial, all the details of the Grace-Tom-Lisa love triangle came to light. The media covered the case as a high-society murder out of jealousy. The Mitchell children became the subject of unhealthy attention, and Tom lost most of his clients due to the scandal. Grace was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In her final statement, she said she did not regret what she had done because she was protecting her family. But those who knew her well saw pain and remorse in her eyes. The family she tried to save was destroyed forever. The children were left with their unfaithful father, who now had to explain to them why their mother had become a murderer. Tom never recovered from the double trauma of his mistress's death and his wife's arrest. Grace Mitchell, a successful businesswoman and caring mother, became a murderer because she was unable to accept the changes in her life. Her analytical mind, which had always been a source of strength, led to tragedy when it was directed towards solving emotional problems with force.